Honored to be here, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be among friends. May I have a show of hands as to how many of you know at least one member of my family? Now, let's have another show of hands about how many of you do not know me, have not met me before tonight. How many? There we go. A few of you have not met me before tonight. So I'm very honored to meet you for the very first time. I actually want to start off with a couple of personal acknowledgments. One is Mrs. Wexstrom, who's here, and Mrs. Wexstrom's daughter Jenny was in my class of 1965 at Maynard High School. And Jenny played the oboe and she played the piano. Maynard in those days had an extraordinary music program through its public high school system. And I always admired her very greatly for her skill. The Finnish-American contribution to our town in music has gone on for decades and throughout our town's history. And Jenny went on to college and majored in music and then played in orchestras, and now she's teaching piano out in Ohio, in Cleveland. So I want to acknowledge that. And then Betty Tompkins, where is Betty Tompkins is here and knew your family very well as well. Hi, Mrs. Tompkins, nice to see you. Tell David I said hello and all that. But yes.
I think my daughter was in your class too, Elaine McCann.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Elaine Erkinen. I refuse to recognize that marriage. It's always going to be Erkinen to me. So I always see Jim downtown and I say, you watch out, I'm going to tell Elaine what you're telling me down here. So, but tell Elaine hello. And the Erkinens are a great family as well. You know, I wondered when I was invited to speak here, in one sense, we Mullins are never really accused of having any elements of self-doubt or lack of confidence, but I wondered why I was chosen and my family was chosen, and I was puzzled about that for a while, and then I finally realized that really the secret is that my family has done a great deal, has been civically involved, but what's extraordinary about it, I only learned by going to the cemetery tonight. And it's really on my mother's side that all this happens, but it is remarkable because I went to St. Bridget's Cemetery, and if any of you have been to St. Bridget's, you know that it is not quite as old as the Glenwood Cemetery. But when you go into the St. Bridget's Cemetery and you look to the left, those are where the oldest graves were put in at St. Bridget's Cemetery. And up in that corner is my great-great-grandfather. And he was buried there in 1873, and as far as I can figure out from looking at his grave, he's one of the first 3 or 4 that were buried in St. Bridget's. He had a son named Edward Fearns. Edward Fearns is buried there just 20 feet away, and he died in 1910. That's my mother's grandfather. Edward Fearns had a son named Frank Fearns, and Frank Fearns lived to 1933. He's buried there, and that's my mother's father. And then a very few feet away from him is my mother, who was buried there last year, and she lived from 1912 to 2005. But it continues from there. My brother Ed Mullin, whom many of you know here in town, is active civically here in Maynard. And of course, he's still very much alive. He's coaching football tonight, or he would have been here, but he's still very much alive. And his daughter, Marcia, is living on 3rd Street in town, and she married Brian Smith from Acton, and he's active in the school committee, and Marcia and he have kids and the children, and that makes the 8th generation of Maynard people, Mullins, who have been located, I'm sorry, it's 7 generations of consecutive living here in town of the Mullin family through my mother's family and patrimony and matrimony here in the town. I actually want to acknowledge Peg Brown because Peg has done a great book on the Civil War veterans of Maynard, and I was looking at this grave, Peg, of Frank Fearns, 1873, and I think he might have been the one who was the veteran of the Civil War. But his grave is there, so he's noted in your book, I believe, and Peg did a great book on the Civil War veterans here. So that is it. It's the longevity that I've had here, in addition to the to the public service that we've all had. Now we're going to start in on these slides. I wanted to make this past, present, and future. What Dave did not say, that when people ask me, what is your profession? Are you a musician or an attorney or a banker or a lawyer? I'm an historian. I actually am a former ranger historian for Minuteman National Park in Concord, Massachusetts, and that really is my first love. And my definition of history is always that it is the past living up to the present day. So I don't want to forget the present day. So we'll begin at the beginning and proceed and go through some buildings you may recognize. All right, I'll press the button here. Now this is, I mentioned the Fearns family. This is the house where I grew up. 7 Haines Street, if any of you know where that house is, there's a big sign out right now saying, for rent to own, if anyone wants to rent the house. And this is my grandfather, and his name was Frank Fearns, and my grandmother, Bertha Fearns, and she was a school teacher. Of my 4 grandparents, 3 of them were born and grew up and died in Maynard. Bertha was the only one who was a foreigner. She came from the city of Marlborough. So when Frank married Bertha, he brought Bertha home in from Marlborough. They had this house built for themselves, and behind my grandfather Frank is hard to see, but my uncle Edward Fearns, who went to Tufts University and was a chemist. Frank Fearns is notable for a couple of reasons. He was one of the founder of the Maynard Elks. Any members of the Maynard Elks here in the audience? If you look on the Elks, if you go into the Elks and you see the plaque to the founding members, my grandfather Frank Fearns is on that plaque. And the other thing that he's noted for is that he is the father of my mother Alice. Now this is my mother Alice and my father Leo, and they're newlyweds in this spot, and they look kind of happy. That's because they haven't had 8 children yet. That'll do it every time. Now here I am. This is a picture of me. Dave took some pictures and he needed a human being, so this is my mother's house. And the remarkable thing about that house, which is maybe some of you have had the same situation, but my mother was born in this room upstairs, and she died 93 years later downstairs, living in one house. I said, Ma, why didn't you move? And she said, I like it here. So but that's the house, and my mother and father had 8 children. We all grew up there, right on Route 27. Now this is, I told Dave I wanted to go around and show different houses in Maynard. If some of you recognize them, put your hands up. But this is a house 2 doors up from the Roosevelt School, right on the left as you're facing the Roosevelt School, and that's where my mother's grandparents grew up. So they grew up in Maynard at that house, 2 doors from the Roosevelt School. Now some of you might be familiar with Manning Pharmacy. The name of Manning, anyone heard of Manning Pharmacy in here? Irving Manning? Irving Manning. Irving Manning bought that pharmacy from my grandfather Frank Fearns. So my grandfather had the pharmacy. It was known as Fearns Pharmacy. He sold it to Irving Manning, and then Irving Manning went on and sold it to, that's the building where Manning Pharmacy was right there, and now it's Neighborhood Pizza. So I don't know whether that's a step up or down, but that's what it is. Irving Manning sold it to Richard Saluski. Richard Saluski developed it into a CVS pharmacy. So when you go into CVS pharmacy, you're going into Fearns Pharmacy, my grandfather on that side of my family. Next we come to my father's side of the family, and I don't know whether, but this is 199 Main Street, and this is the house. If any of you go into Town Hall where we are now, here we are, Town Hall. As you're facing Town Hall, the first house to your left is 199 Main Street. And 199 Main Street is the house where, here it is, here's a front picture of the house. This was built by my grandfather, James Mullin. So we're switching now from the Fearn side of the family to the Mullin side of the family. If you have any questions or you know any of the Mullins, please raise your hand. This house was built by my grandfather, did not go to school. He was an immigrant from Ireland via Canada, and he became an apprentice and must have been a very, very bright and brilliant man, because he became a plumber, a builder, and an architect without any education. And he built a variety of buildings here in town, and one of them was this building, the house where my grandparents lived, and it was the first house in Maynard to have electricity. So that's 199 Main Street. Now, I didn't have a picture of Town Hall, but some of you may remember that there was something here before the Town Hall. And what was the name of the school? The Woodrow Wilson School. So the Wilson School was here, and my grandmother was living in that house. And in the middle of the night one night, she was awakened by some noise and looked out, and the school was burning down. And she called my father up, and my father called up the fire department, but they were too late to get here, and the Wilson School burned to the ground. And then later on, we put up the town hall. This is, I wanted to remember to go get the address, but this is, the woman who called in the fire for the Wilson School was my grandmother, Catherine Meley Mullen, and this is her mother, and her name is Annie Meley. And the address of that is right up around 275 Main Street, right before you get to Mill Street. That house is still there, and so that is my great-grandmother standing in front of her house. The house is still there. This is my grandfather, James Mullin, and my grandmother, Kate, and that's their wedding day, November 15th, 1898. And the story that I tell about my grandmother is probably very similar to some of the stories that you have, and that is, like her husband, she was uneducated. She quit school in the 5th grade here in Maynard, and she went to work over here. She went to work running a loom, and I always remember her telling the story that they took her from school, and they put the carpenter came in to put a little stool for her so she could reach the looms to begin making the blankets and the woolen clothing. And she's my grandmother, and now her grandson is one of the owners of the mill where she went to work. So and I tell the 5th graders this story when they come down, and they come down every June, and they go up and they climb up to the top of the clock. Can you imagine being a 5th grader and having to quit school and going to work for 40, 50, and 60 hours a week? And that's what they had to do as immigrants and as children of immigrants, but they knew that their children would get a better life by that sacrifice. And I always wonder, I say, Nana, I hope I'm doing all right for you. And there she is right there. And someone's here from Summit Street. My grandfather, James, had a brother, and his name was Michael. They had a 3rd brother named Pat, so it was Pat, Mike, and Jim. Irish people don't have much originality in names. So James and his wife, Kate, are here, and they lived at 199 Street, and James's brother Michael and his wife Teresa lived at 3 Summit Street. So that's the original owner of your house. And if the plumbing fails, it's because they didn't take very good care of the house. But
I'll just look you up.
all right, yeah. I think the statute of limitations has run out. But now this is my grandmother, and I remember as a boy. This is again the Catherine Meley Mullen, who quit school in the 5th grade. She lived into her 80s. And again, this is a mill story. So many of you know the story of the mill. This is her brother John Meley, and this is her brother Bill and her brother Frank. And John Meley went to work as a loom mechanic. He would fix the looms, and he worked in the mill, the American Woolen Company, for 60 years. And he went deaf, and he was crippled from an injury that he suffered at work. There was no workers' compensation. He lived into his 90s. And then my uncle Bill Meley, they lived both on Thompson Street. Bill Meley had a disfigurement as a child. He had a birth defect, and that he had what's called a club foot, but he's very bright. So he worked in the accounting office of the mill. He couldn't do manual labor. Then their brother Frank moved out to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and their name is Meley, so that's the Meley side of the family here today. Now this is my grandfather, James Mullin here, and some of my siblings like to sing and dance and think that they're artistic in many ways, and I think we get it from him because he's riding a horse, and he's the parade marshal at Columbus Day in 1916, so he's very theatrical. James was not only a carpenter and a builder and an architect, he was active in the town. And many of you may know, if you can think back from your mothers and fathers back to the 30s and 40s, but welfare systems in the turn of the century were run by each town. The town would put in a certain amount of sum for people who were having hard times, and they'd have an official who would run that money, and his title was called Overseer of the Poor. And a person would have hard times or they'd be sick, and they'd come to the Overseer of the Poor here in Maynard, and the Overseer of the Poor could give out money from the town to that person who needed some type of help. My grandfather was that person. He was an elected Overseer of the Poor for many years here in Maynard. And here is another, this is the Bill Meley, whom you just saw, John Meley, my dad, Leo, his sister Mildred, who was a school teacher, Margaret Mead, who's a cousin of ours, and my mother, Alice, and an uncle of mine, Charles McCarthy. So you're getting all of the Mullins here today. This is my mother and father on their 40th wedding anniversary. They look happy because the last of the 8 children has finally left home. Nowadays, you have children, they don't leave home, so the world has changed a little bit. Here are the 8 of us and my mother and father, and we could probably tell stories together if we had a certain amount of beer and wine as to hard times. But we had hard times when my father lost his job for a while in the early 50s. We look kind of happy there, but we managed to get through together. And here are the children, and some of you may know them. My brother Ed was the oldest. Ed is 65. The years have gone by. Leo is 63. John is 61. There's I'm 59. Walter is 57. Peter is 55. Billy is 53. And my sister Mary passed away. She passed away 3 years ago, and it broke all of our hearts. She lived in Washington, D.C., and she had breast cancer. She has 2 lovely children, and we miss her every day. She was wonderful, and that's the nature of life, of course. Mrs. Stigliani is here, and I know your daughter was a good friend of my sister Mary, and God bless, tell her hello for me. And that's the nature of living in town, is that so many people know each of us in so many special ways. Here are all of us grown up. My brother Leo isn't in this picture, but here's brother Ed. And again, he's the 65. John, who's 61. The handsomest one of the bunch. I forget his name, but he's 59. Walter, who's 57. Peter, who's 55. And my sister, a year before she passed away, and my mother. And we've come a long way, as most families do. Can anyone, do you have a show of hands? Anyone recognize this? That's not the Wilson School. It's not the Wilson School, is it? Wrong answer. Can anyone else? Coolidge School. Did you see that, Mrs. Westrom? That's the Coolidge School. The Coolidge School was built in 2 phases. They built it 1 floor at a time. And my grandfather, the fellow I bragged about as being the architect, was the builder of one of the 2 stories. In fairness, I don't know which story he built.
I believe it was the first.
Okay.
Actually, I know it was the first.
All right, so my grandfather built the Coolidge School, and it still stands there today.
$4,000.
Can anyone recognize this building now? Who? St. Bridget's Rectory. Yeah, I'm not going to confession up there. I'm just standing in front. My grandfather built that building as well, and did a good job at it. There's a closer view of it. Now there I am, we're getting more to the present. I went to Maynard High and I scored a touchdown against Hudson High School, and it's the only touchdown I scored against Hudson, so I had to put this in here. Now, some of you may remember that I lived here not too long ago, and in the year 1984, I lived on Ricky Drive here in town, and I ran for the state senate. It was an open state senate seat. If you remember, Chet Atkins was running for Congress. That opened up the state senate seat, and I decided to run for the state senate, and I ran against the state representative at the time who was representing Maynard. Anyone recognize that gentleman on the left? Salucci. So here we are, and he looks a little younger, and I think I look a little younger too. But hello Walter, the Sokolowski family. This is another great family here in town. He does a great job. He deserves a pay raise. But we had a great race that year, 1984, and I lost. He won, and then went on, became a state senator, and then became lieutenant governor, and then became governor. And at one time, I was chatting, my wife and I were chatting with him and his wife, and he wandered off, and I said, you know, she said, what are you doing now? I said, well, I'm in real estate development in Maynard with the Maynard Mill, and she said, I'm not sure that you didn't get the better deal of that bargain. But we had a good race, and he had a wonderful family from Hudson. I got to know them quite a bit, especially his late father, and they were as civically minded in Hudson as the Mullins were here in Maynard. And we had really a reconciliation. When I came back to the mill and Paul became Governor Salucci, what we did was getting to the present tense, 3 other gentlemen and I came together here in 1997. And in 1997, these gentlemen, their names were Robert Bernardo, William DePietri, and Robert McNamara. And I had met Mr. Bernardo in 1995. He was a developer in Weston. I was active in politics over there. And I said, what do you do? He said, I do real estate development. I said to him, it was like a passing conversation, if you ever have a development in Maynard, that's where I'm from, and I'll help you with that. So he said, okay, and then 3 years went by, and he called me up and said, Bill DePietri and I are going to buy the Maynard Mill if we can. Would you like to come along with us? And I said, okay. So I've joined up with them in 1997, so I've now been working here. When we came in, it was empty. It had been empty for 2 years. When we took over, it had 3 tenants and 30,000 square feet, and had been empty for the rest of it for 2 years or longer. And we worked hard. We had the support right from the beginning from the town of Maynard. They voted in a compact agreement with us called the TIF, or a tax increment financing agreement. We were able to borrow $20 million, a lot of money, on an empty building. We borrowed the $20 million. We then took the 30,000 feet and the 3 tenants, and today we have 102 tenants and 1.1 million leased out. So we've done very, very well. But really, the town of Maynard has to be thanked very much, because you've been very, very good to my partners and to me. I also just want to briefly parenthesize a little bit, and that is the selectmen were helpful to us at the time. And some of the townspeople said, why should you give these individuals a tax discount on the growth of their property? Our tax payments to the town of Maynard began with a 0 in 1997, 90,000 in 1998, and now we're paying 650,000 a year in property taxes, and that's going to continue to grow as long as we continue to prosper. So I think we're able to give back the faith and the love and the support in real property tax dollars that the town gave us for this property. In any case, as soon as we opened up our first building, Building 1, and we had Monster.com come in as our anchor tenant, we invited Governor Salucci to come out. He was perfectly willing to do so, and it was a moment of really honor for me, and I hope a privilege for him. This is Marty Meehan, our congressman, Governor Salucci, Jeff Taylor, who at the time was the chief executive officer of Monster.com, Pat Moynihan from the Highway Department. Hard to see here, but this is our former state rep. And all of a sudden her name is escaping me. What is it? Susan Pope. Susan Pope. Wayne Budd, John Stefanini, and Mayor Lynch from Lawrence. So they all came out for this grand event that we had to open Clock Tower Place. Now, I haven't mentioned Leo. Leo was the one who left town. You know, there's what we call the country mouse and the city mouse. And Leo thought of himself as the city mouse. And we Mullins were always taught by our mother and father to try to be all that you can be. And really, as we all had goals in starting out, the 8 of us, that we would want to be big fish in big ponds. And for 7 of us, we became big fish in little ponds. But Leo did become a big fish in a big pond, and that he became first the president of the First National Bank of Chicago, and then for 7 years became the president of Delta Airlines. Now, I went on from here, from Maynard High, and I went to Harvard College. And at Harvard College, in my year, I had 2 famous classmates. One was the actor Tommy Lee Jones, and I played football with him, but the other was Tommy Lee Jones's roommate. Does anyone know who Tommy Lee Jones's roommate is? Al Gore. So I got along well with Al, and when he was nominated for the presidency in 2000, he appointed me to be a member of his platform committee, crafting up his views on the issues. And I went to Los Angeles. I had the honor of going to that convention. My brother Leo did too, as a sponsor of Delta Airlines. And we went to a party. Now, can anyone recognize that fellow in the middle? Now, I don't normally hang around Republicans, but here I am, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and of course he's now the governor of California, and just a very, very great guy, very engaging in person. And Leo then became a sponsor of the Red Sox. And Leo got to throw the first ball out of the Yankees-Red Sox series 3 years ago, and we all had the honor of going out. Does anyone recognize where this is? That's the Green Monster, left field at Fenway Park. And this is Joseph and Walter and John and Leo and his wife Leah Malmberg from Stowe, if anyone remembers the Malmberg family, and George Malmberg and Raoul Malmberg. That's Leah's mother and father. Eddie and his wife Linda, who's from Coleraine, was a school teacher here in Maynard. Some of you may remember her. Brother Bill made a lot of money and moved to Acton. That's what happens when Maynard people make money. They moved to Acton. His wife Mary Ann. This is my brother Peter, who lives in Stowe, and his wife Patsy, who's a banker, and Ed's son Ted Fire, who lives in Stowe, and their daughter Melissa. So that was a moment of great pride to us, and we never forget that we're from Maynard wherever we go, and we like to think that we're emissaries from our town. And I guess that's it. I've covered a lot of ground, but I said to Dave that I really wanted to cover a number of points that might somehow relate to all of you who are here in the room. One is to show you the buildings where we went to school and where we live here in town. Those buildings that are old and not here, and those buildings that are old and still here. The second is to relate some of the progress that we've made in family life as a member of the Mullin family. And I think that I want to say that there are 3 reasons that I think Maynard is extraordinarily unique. First is that no matter what ethnic group you're from or whatever your background is, you're always welcomed here with love and a sense of fair play. And second is that everyone gets a chance to pull his or her oar and do his or her part. But if you're unable to, Maynard people are going to help you out. And those are the 2 things I think I learned and I benefited from my family, first of all, from St. Bridget's, where I had a wonderful religious education, second of all, and third of all, from the townspeople here in Maynard, you people in this room, and your friends and neighbors whom I've been privileged to know throughout the years. And I've tried to show you that we go a lot of places as members of the Mullin family, as many of your children and your loved ones do as well. I've had the privilege of going to all 50 states, to many countries of the world, And wherever I go, I have those values that I learned from you good people here and from my family and from my church. I just commit to you that wherever I go, I either saying the righteousness of your cause is the righteousness of my cause, and righteousness of your cause, our cause, will forever be my strength. Thank you very much. Now, questions, comments, any of you? Yes.
I have a question. Do you know if that picture of, I believe it was either your grandfather or your great-grandfather on the horse?
Yes.
Do you know where, was that taken?
I think it was on Maple Street. Maple Street going up, we think it's right near Maple Street where it comes to intersect with Brook Street. And they evidently had some huge celebration for Columbus Day that year. And that's James Mullin, the guy who built the Coolidge School and the rectory. Any other thoughts, comments? Any? Which Mullin which Mullins do you know? Which Mullin did you know?
Eddie.
Eddie. Okay, and you knew Mary. Knew all of them. Yeah.
I remember when your mother and father were courting.
I guess you're a little older than I am.
They told me that they never courted before they were married because it was a sin. And Mrs. Tompkins,
I know the older boys, the older group, better than me.
yes, yeah, I'm in the older group. I'm part of the older group. Which, did you know any of the,
Mother was our school advisor, our class advisor.
your class, what, and so she taught, I won't ask what class.
1940, we
Nin-
were the first class that she was advisor to.
Oh, good. She started teaching in 1933, 1934 from Boston University.
I was in her first class here in Maynard. When she first came to Maynard, I had her as my English teacher.
As your English teacher, you know whom I saw on the street just the other day, and I was talking to him, is Bob Duggan. Now, do you remember? Now, were you in Bob's class?
He's older than I am.
Because he told me he had my mother as a practice teacher when she came by here, and now the years go by because I believe she began teaching around 1935, that meant, and she stopped teaching, I think, around 1985. So she had a 50-year period of teaching the children of Maynard, and you turned out very well, Mrs. Tompkins. So, and did you knew?
I knew Billy, and one of your brothers used to babysit. You said it was Ed.
Yes, yeah,
Babysit for him.
he used to be, yeah, and we never got to babysit. I worked at the United Co-op, and so that was, and I was a paper boy.
In fact, it was your mother's sister that introduced Sam Bacharach to his wife.
Okay.
That was your mother's sister.
Now, this is one of the Bacharachs. That's a famous name in Maynard, like many others. And my memory of the Bacharachs is my father used to talk about a Sam
Sam,
Bacharach.
they were very close.
Now, who would that be, and how is he related to you?
He's my brother-in-law. He died.
He died. Yeah, and
In Worcester.
then, you know, what happens is you're from Maynard and you go around, and I was in Washington, D.C. one year, and I was at a party, and I met somebody who was a Bacharach from Maine. Do you have a relative?
Yes, Louis.
Louis Bacharach.
Did you go to the Holocaust Museum? Is that where you
Yes.
met Susan? It was his son. It was his son's wife.
Okay.
She's written books.
But then I thought it was his daughter whom I met,
Yes, yes.
and so that's
She was
the,
always in Washington.
well, the Bacharachs, to those of you who don't know, had a supermarket right next to the KFC. And growing up, there was the KFC, there was the Bacharachs, there was the A&P, and the First National and United Co-op.
Right.
And now with 129 Parker, we might get another one soon enough. So which Mullins did you know? Did you know?
Well, I know quite a few, but you probably knew my husband's family, the Laras.
The Laras, sure. Now Maureen Lara, now Maureen was my classmate.
Oh, yeah.
Now, are you related to Laurie Lara?
Yeah,
Yeah?
he was my brother-in-law. My husband was Nucci Lara.
Nucci Lara. Nucci Lara had the New Idea Store. See, we're going to have these stories that go on from here. New Idea Store is where what's down there now? White Star. White Star. And if you needed a shirt, some trousers, you'd go down there, Nucci, and he had a brother. What was the brother's name? Bernie and Nucci Lara.
And of course, you knew Albert.
Albert. And
Everybody knew Albert.
he was the superintendent of schools.
He was principal when I went to school.
Yeah, well, the Levers were a great family in town as well here. So you,
And
if you,
then Sam Lara, that was
if you tell if you see Maureen, tell her I said hello. So we might be here a while if we keep going now. You know Peter.
Yeah, many times.
Many times.
Bob Douglas, our neighbor.
All right. Now, did Peter do any painting for you or anything?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If any of you want a painting job, call my brother Peter. So that's, he's the only one who's a tradesman, and he's probably the richest one in the entire family. So, now, did you know any Mullin, sir?
No, I didn't move till 65.
Oh, you're a newcomer. Well, you, and of course you knew, yeah, my mother, yeah, and she's,
And father.
Yeah, but the mother was, you know, class advisor.
Class advisor.
Father, definitely.
yeah. Well, we miss her a lot. Now, did you know any Mullins?
Yes, your dad and your mother, they
My-
were both teachers.
Both teachers. And Ann, did you know any Mullins?
Your father and
I'm
mother.
a newcomer.
New, well, you know the Tompkins lady right next to you. And then Elaine, Mrs. Erkinen, of course. Did you know any
They would have taught my older kids at high school.
in high school? And your last name is?
Hill.
Hill. Okay. And would have been my mother who taught them? Yeah. Well, that,
I had both your mother and father, I think.
both. Well, my father was he loved teaching. He was the principal of the high school during the World War II. And it was different in those days. School has changed. He tells a story about Dickie White. Do any of you know Dickie White? Well, I forget what Dickie was doing, but Dickie was mischievous, and I think he was smoking. So my father had a bag of money because you'd collect the money from selling candy during recess, and he was the principal. So we caught Dickie. So instead of saying, "Would you come back to school?" he clubbed Dickie over the head like this. And he threw out his wrist and had the weight, so Dickie didn't get hurt at all, but my father did. So, and there's Mr. Bariloni. Hello, Mr. Bariloni. Another great family here in town. How about you? Did you know any of the?
Not that I remember.
Yeah. Well, we're a forgettable bunch.
Your father and mother, and I knew Eddie and...
Well, good. Yeah. And anyone else? Did you know it?
I know your father was in the dramatic club with me.
My dad.
Years ago.
My dad was in the dramatic club with I don't know whether you remember a woman named Mrs. Catola.
Yes, yes.
Helen Catola. And it's hard for us to remember that we didn't have movie theaters in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in town, so you'd put on plays, and these plays would have tremendous attendance. And I think that they would put on the plays on the Parker Street Hall. But I have some of the playbills from my father, and he loved doing those plays. And anyone else in the back, did you know?
He was my high school principal when I was a freshman.
Okay, there we go. So, and you live next to my, right behind my father on Martin Street, and the Summit Street group.
Well, we'll never be from Maynard because we've only been here 17 years. That's right. People would say, "Where do you live?" And I'd say 3 Summit Street, and people say the Mullen House.
Well, there it is. These,
It'll never be my house.
yeah, it's the Mullin house.
A couple of things about the house that I'd like to just bounce off.
I got some paint in the car if you want me to.
One was until we unfortunately lost Filippo a couple of years back.
Yes.
I used to be able to say to people that I actually lived, my next door neighbor was a clown.
He's a clown. There you go.
But we heard a story, and I don't know if there's any truth to it, and if I'm opening up a can of worms that causes trouble, just shut me right up. But someone told us that that house was once known as the Spite House because it was built on that little piece of land. It's a little
Right.
piece of land
Yeah, on a hill.
by someone to spite the people in the big house.
Ah,
It's the king's house, and I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. That's the first time I've heard of that. Of course, the mill worker, the owners of the mill, lived in these large houses overlooking the mill. And when I was a boy in 1965, one of them burned down. I don't remember, Mrs. Wexstrom, whether you remember that house burning down. So in the middle of the night, it was just a huge fire. But in any case, Maynard is remarkable because these homes in Front Street and these homes in Presidential Village up here in Arthur Street are built for the mill. And the Railroad Street homes, too, are built for the mill. And I made my comment about different ethnic groups coming in. When they built the mill, it was first the Irish, then the Italians, Finns, and Polish people who came in, Russian Jews and Russian Orthodox. And then when I was a kid, they came in from Puerto Rico. So oddly enough, when I was here, this whole railroad street, the last years of manufacturing in Maynard were largely Puerto Ricans. And so that was the latest ethnic group. Getting back to your comment about the house, though, I have an idea for your historic society. Dave mentioned I am the vice president of the Historic Society in Weston, where I live. And we've begun creating plaques. And what we do is we get the plaque, we research the deed of the original owner of the home. So let's assume that it was George Mullin, my great uncle, who built that home. And we have the plaques, and we make a little wooden plaque, and we sell them for $50, and it'll say, the Mullin House, 1927, and we sell them for $50 or $25. It's some low figure, and it's a great revenue generator. They've become very, very popular amongst all, no matter how old the house is. So I think that's an idea for, I'll take 10% of the commission on that one.
I would imagine, though, based on what my wife said, where I put up a plaque like that, people would tell me I didn't need it.
You didn't need it. Everybody already knows. So anyway, I want to actually take this time to say that the Mullin family is very happy to have been here and is still happy to be here. And I just want to brief you a little bit in that this mill is about to undergo some changes. We're talking to the town about possibly putting a fire station here, donating land for it, just as we did 5 years ago, and developing some senior housing and workforce housing condominiums along the space here. We've just begun the negotiation process with the town boards, and so you'll be hearing about it if we can make sense out of it. What you do when you're in real estate business is you do what's called a fiscal analysis or a pro forma. It's a Latin expression, a pro forma, and that says what are the costs of doing this development and what are the benefits of doing the development. There's a lot going on in the town with 129 Parker. There's also a lot going on in town in terms of conservation. The wildlife refuge is here on this map of Maynard of ours. What we have in our community is an extraordinary combination of conservation, a wonderful downtown, and a wonderful residential area in which to live. Good schools, and I really think that Maynard's best days are still ahead of it. We've had good days and bad days in the past, but our days are getting better, and I think our best days are still ahead of us. So I hope that you'll welcome me back sometime, and I could join with you again and talk to you again another time. So thank you very much.